Passing. Its roots are in the pre-Civil War South. Now, Michelle Miller tells us, a new movie based on a nearly 100-year-old novel explores this very complex subject.
Viola, we've been looking everywhere for you. Are you talking to me?
It's been a theme in Hollywood for years.
I'm your mammy.
From Imitation of Life.
Do I look like her daughter? Do I look like I could be her daughter?
One thing.
To The Human Stain.
When you meet the guy from Pitt, don't tell him you're colored, okay?
Don't tell him.
Don't bring it up. You're neither one thing nor the other.
And off-screen, the subject of passing, crossing the color line, is just as complex.
The world perceives me as white, at least visually.
Chicago lawyer Martina Hone says she's lived her whole life balancing her black mother's identity with her European father's privilege.
Have you ever passed at any point in your life?
I've never passed intentionally. I have never thought to myself, I'm going to go in here and pretend that I'm white. You walk into a room, people assume you have the power of a white person in this country, and that experience is not the same experience that most black people have in this country.
So this is a family that is clearly black.
Mm-hmm.
You're just somewhat the exception.
I'm just on the melanin-challenged end of the family spectrum.
Yeah, Lisa Funderburg is the author of Black, White, Other, and also Mixed Race.
So there are all of the advantages that come with appearing to be white, right? You can get a cab, you're not followed in stores, but it also means others expose their racism to you. They do it in comments, they do it in behaviors, and you're a witness to it. That is me with my dad.
She says passing describes when a member of a particular group is perceived as a member of another.
I've talked to people who are gay who talk about being straight passing. No one they encounter will necessarily know the full breadth of their identity unless they choose to tell it to people. And it is up to you to either disabuse them of that notion or to correct that or to challenge that or not.
So you haven't ever thought to?
What?
You ever thought of passing?
No, why should I?
This week, a new film will put passing into the spotlight again.
I'm trying to find out the history of the blonde you've brought along.
Things aren't always what they seem.
I'll be damned.
Based on the 1929 novel by Harlem Renaissance writer Nella Larson, the movie called Passing tells the story of two black women, one who actively passes for white, the other who does not.
This is my husband, John Bellew. Does he know?
Rebecca Hall directed the film.
It's saying it's about racial passing, but is it also about these other modes of performance, these other binaries, male, female, gay, straight? Identity is this sort of cross-section between the story we tell about ourselves and the one that society puts on us.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias, Alice.
Julio. Julio.
Best known for her role in Vicky Cristina Barcelona, Hall is making her directorial debut.
I mean, I spent all of pre-production here. And,
to pull it off, she spent time in Harlem at the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture and filmed on this street.
You know, everyone said it's too big a scope, it's too arty, it's too ambitious, it's too formal, it's too black and white, it's too all the twos, and here we are.
What have you told them?
Ruth Negga and Tessa Thompson are her stars.
And you're happy?
Of course, really. As you say, I have everything I ever wanted.
To have the privilege of ambiguity as a protagonist on screen is really rarefied as women characters, particularly women of color.
Did it cause you to reflect on who you saw yourselves as?
Oh, it's all, for me, it's about belonging. Everybody, every person of color or anybody who's marginalized or different, It's as simple as when you walk in a room, you scan it, and you do it unconsciously. The two words for me, safety and belonging.
Both actors say they've been faced with stereotypes of racial conformity.
I've had that experience from various viewpoints of, but you're not really black, or, but you're not black. I mean, it's amazing what someone can do with the intonation of their one's voice, you know.
I remember growing up this idea of like, you don't talk black, you don't talk like that, you know, which there shouldn't be a uniform idea in terms of blackness.
There's probably a time when we all engaged in some form of passing.
Stanford historian Allyson Hobbs has written a history of racial passing in America.
Perhaps somebody made an assumption about us and we went with it.
Hobbs says passing dates back to the time of slavery, first as a means of escape and survival, then later on in the 20th century in response to so-called one-drop rules, which made it legal to discriminate against anyone with any black blood. Still, some in the black community consider the act of passing as a betrayal of their identity. And remember, passing wasn't always black and white.
Someone who is from a lower socioeconomic status might decide that they want to pass as someone of a higher socioeconomic status. A woman might want to serve in the military, if we think about the period before women were able to serve in the military, and might decide to pass as a man. During the period when Chinese people were excluded from coming into the United States, sometimes Chinese immigrants would pass as Mexican.
Of course, today, with the world becoming more multiracial, Hobbs says passing is almost a thing of the past. Still, there are lingering effects.
The person who passed had to sever their relationships with their family, their friends. There were very high emotional stakes to passing.
Something director Rebecca Hall discovered firsthand.
My grandfather was African American and passed white.
Hall is the daughter of British director Peter Hall and American opera singer Maria Ewing. She says telling the story of passing also meant confronting her own family history, which included some uncomfortable conversations with her mother.
Because I did pretty much all my life look at her and think, you look like a black woman to me.
Wow.
But it was not something that was really spoken about. Like, she then did tell me about some incidents of pretty ugly racism towards her and her father when she was a kid. And she told me that she asked him once, and he just looked at the floor and said, you know, I did it all for you.
Hall unearthed the black heritage she says she's proud of.
And there are huge amounts of people, extraordinary people that did extraordinary things. Black people that were proud to be black. And my mother doesn't know that. You know, she didn't know her own grandfather's name. Sorry.
This is emotional.
You think they'd be satisfied being white?
Who's satisfied being anything?
Hall has dedicated her film,
We're all of us passing for something or other,
a 13-year-long labor of love, to her mother.
aren't we?
I think I want it to invite a place that's about the grey areas. Often what's left for us to determine is who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. But I think it's the place of art to look at the shades of that in between. Because if you end up being too rigid about who you think you ought to be, you turn into a powder keg. That's the moral of the story.